I see Ryan and Stephanie online. Are you guys ready to go in 1 minute?
I think so, Jeff. Stephanie, are you good to go here in a minute?
Yep, I am good to go. Just making sure everyone can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Sounds good. Good to see your smiling face. So wait another 30 seconds and then off you go.
Sounds good, Jeff. Thank you. All right, the clock on my computer just turned to 12:30, so I think that's Jeff's giving me the thumbs up to go ahead and kick off the Washington State Department of Ecology update. I think most of you know me, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself just in case. I'm Stephanie Schleif. I'm the Nuclear Waste Program Manager with Washington State Department of Ecology. With me, I have a couple of folks. I have Brian Miller, who's our Communications Manager here in the Nuclear Waste Program, and I also have Edward Holbrook, who is the Deputy Program Manager. Both will help me as we go through and speak to each of the topics you requested we provide an update on. And I'll just start off by saying thank you for inviting us to provide the board another update on happenings that have been going on at the Department of Ecology. It's been a busy last couple of months for us, so we're excited to be here with some big announcements. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. Thank you. All right, so the first one, and I'm not sure if you've heard yet from the Department of Energy, so this might be a little bit duplicative, but we're very excited to say that the holistic agreement has been finalized. I know we've talked to the board previously on what the holistic agreement entailed, and you likely saw notices and news releases from us the last couple of months. Back in December, we issued a news release announcing that we had issued a responsiveness summary to all the public comments that we had received on the holistic agreement that went out for public comment in summer of 2024. We also issued response letters to each of the tribal nations that sent us comments on the holistic agreement as well. And then earlier in this month, on January 10th, we issued a news release announcing that we had signed the tri-party agreement changes for the holistic agreement, and that the court had signed the consent decree approving the changes for that agreement as well. And I know Ryan very nicely linked to the news release that links to the final change packages and the final consent decree here in the presentation. If by chance you didn't see that news release or haven't looked at the final change package for that. So we're very excited to have that done and turn our eyes towards implementation of that and what that means in the coming years for us in the Department of Energy and EPA. I think that's all that I have on the holistic agreement. And the next slide is for us to ask questions. So I thought we could go through each of these and then at the end answer any questions that you have for us. So Eddie, I'll turn it over to you to talk about status of the Hanford site-wide permit and then leaking tanks agreed order, where we're at on deliverables for that.
Yeah, so providing an update for the Hanford site-wide permit revision 9A. Department of Ecology and U.S. Department of Energy and its contractors have completed 33 out of 55 of the unit group workshops. Department of Energy has certified the addenda and sent those over to us for those 33. And Department of Ecology is either through and completed permit production or working on permit production for those 33 units. What remains for Rev 9 is the outstanding balance of those units from the 55. Department of Ecology and Department of Energy only have 2 unit groups, the Solid Waste Operating Complex and the SSTs, which are still in workshops. But the remaining of those unit groups are going through some phases of certification with the addenda and getting those ready for permit production for public comment here soon. Thanks, Ryan. So I'm happy to say that we are making progress on Rev 9. We are looking to go out for public comment this year and it remains to be determined the exact date at this point. We would like to get out of workshops on the remaining 2 unit groups, which just have a handful of addenda left that have to resolve deficiencies on. And we're looking forward to getting that done here in the next couple of weeks and preparing the rest of the permit for public comment here. So I'll pause there. Likely take questions at the end here. So moving on to leaking tanks agreed order and the addendum. So in 2022, Ecology and Department of Energy established an agreed order for B109 and T111, 2 tanks that Department of Energy has identified as actively leaking. And in 2024, Department of Energy had identified T101, one of the other single shell tanks, as assumed leaking at this time. Department of Energy and Ecology signed an addendum to the agreed order to include T101 and many of the agreements that were written into the original agreed order. Department of Energy was required to go through their system planning to identify the earliest practicable time of fully retrieving B109, T111, and T101. Department of Energy had completed their system plan, including the required evaluation for those 3 leaking tanks in December of 2023. Department of Ecology and Department of Energy discussed and reviewed the system plan and the evaluation within that system plan to identify the earliest practical time for retrieval of those tanks. And earlier this month, both parties had signed change control forms to establish milestones for retrieval of B109, T111, and T101. A brief kind of outline of what transpired in those change control forms. So for the tanks B109, T111, and T101, the current due dates are in line with what was agreed to in a holistic agreement to establish the date as 12/31/2040. This requires Department of Energy to continue to reevaluate in system plans the timing of the retrieval of these 3 tanks. The other milestone that was written into the change control forms includes Department of Energy's requirement to go after 3 assumed leaking single shell tanks within the 22 tanks that have to be retrieved out of S, SX, and U. If this sounds familiar, this was part of the change control forms that were agreed to and signed off on by Department of Energy and Ecology under the holistic agreement. So Ecology is requiring Department of Energy to look at 3 tanks that are categorized as assumed leakers within S, SX, and U, and identify the retrieval timeframes for those by 12/31/2040. I'll stop there.
Eddie, did you give an update on the leak response plan?
No, I did not. So as part of the Rev 9 renewal, Department of Energy had sent over the leak response plan to Ecology for review, and Ecology has identified deficiencies with the leak response plan. We are currently in workshops with Department of Energy to identify resolutions to those deficiencies within the leak response plan. And that plan will be incorporated into the single shell tank system site-wide permit as well for Rev 9, and will be available for comment when Rev 9 goes out for public comment. Thanks, Stephanie, for the reminder.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And I'll just highlight that leak response plan, in case you're not aware, was another deliverable that the Department of Energy had to provide us under the original 2022 agreed order between us and DOE. So I can then take us to Washington state government changes, and in general, just changes that are happening, not just at the government level, but also here in the nuclear waste program, some changes that we've had with staffing and such. Starting with, many of you are familiar with Director Laura Watson, who was our director at the Department of Ecology. She took a new job as the Deputy Attorney General, working for Washington State Attorney General Nick Brown. So we have a new director now who just started last week on Wednesday, has a full 4 days under his belt, and that is Casey Sixkiller, who used to be the regional administrator for Region 10 for EPA. He's familiar with Washington State Department of Ecology, of course, and the important role we play in the state. And we have worked with him some on Hanford as well, so pretty familiar with our portfolio. Very much looking forward to working with him even more closely in his role as our director. And he was appointed in this position by our new governor, Governor Ferguson, who just took over office as well recently. When we get a new governor in office, there also is changes in the governor's policy staff that we work with on Hanford policy issues. Those folks have been identified, and we're working through the process of building up the institutional knowledge on what Hanford is, where the cleanup is, and what our priorities are with the governor's office and with the director. These are really recent changes happening within the last week. So haven't had the opportunities to have those introductory briefings yet, but will likely be happening in the next couple of months. It is a pretty busy time for new folks to be taking office as Washington State Legislature is in session through April. So very busy trying to get Casey confirmed with the Washington State Senate, as well as building critical relationships with our Washington State Legislature. Here at the Nuclear Waste Program, we've also had some changes. Teresa Howell has left, and so we're actively doing a recruitment to fill her position. And I'm also working to backfill the position that was left vacant through Eddie's appointment into the Deputy Program Manager position, the Waste Management Section Manager position. Right now, John Temple is acting in that position, so you might see him in some forums. But I'm going to move forward to try and have those positions filled as quickly as possible. Hopefully by the end of March is really my hope, to have new folks into the seat to help us carry forward. And Teresa Howell was the Compliance and Regulatory Assistant Section Manager. She recently gave a presentation here to the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board around the Tri-Party Agreement, which is one of the many important pieces of work that position oversees, in addition to managing our compliance team as well. They also are a lead negotiator on the Tri-Party Agreement. I think that sort of highlights Washington State government changes. Ryan, I'll turn it over to you to talk about public involvement and outreach.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. So shouldn't take too long on this section, but I wanted to share some current and upcoming opportunities for kind of public engagement, public involvement kind of aspects. The first one, Ecology, a few weeks ago, 10 or so days ago, we issued the annual Tri-Party Agreement Public Involvement Survey. And the annual TPA Public Involvement Survey it's a survey that Ecology conducts on behalf of all three agencies, so Ecology, EPA, and U.S. Department of Energy, to get feedback and recommendations on all three agencies' public involvement and communications work over the prior calendar year. So the survey that we just issued is for calendar year 2024, and so we sent out that survey for public input and response on January 13th. It's currently has a closing date of February 12th. Really just encourage you, if you have the moment, to go and take the survey. The link on the slide here, which I think Mark will send out to the board later, but that link will take you to our blog we issued that's got the information about the survey, as well as the link to the survey itself. But we really value feedback on this survey. We're trying to get as many responses as we can. There's only 2 or 3 questions that are actually required to answer the survey. The other ones are all optional. It's a total of about up to 18 or 19 questions, I think, depending on how you answer it, because there's some skip logic in the survey. But once the survey closes, our communications team is going to work to create a report that summarizes the survey results. We will share that report, and that report includes a summary of the public involvement activities the agencies did last year, the survey results, a summary of the survey results, and then some planned actions that the agencies have from the survey results. And that summary report is typically available in the spring timeframe. I think we issued it about April timeframe last year. But really, again, I just wanted to take the moment to kind of pitch it and encourage you to take it or share with, other individuals or groups that you think might be interested. And we really want to hear from everybody, regardless of whether or not they participated in any public comment period or public meeting or those kind of actions over the last calendar year. Also wanted to share a quick highlight on a couple of the upcoming immediate comment periods that we have. I know that Eddie already talked about the status of the Hanford Site-Wide Permit Revision 9A. But we have two kind of immediate comment periods that Ecology is hosting. And I'll preface by saying this is Ecology comment periods. Department of Energy is still doing, their own separate comment periods. This is just for Ecology's actions. So we're going to be holding a 45-day public comment period on the draft permit renewal for Permafix Northwest. That's currently estimated to start January 27th and conclude on March 14th. And then in addition to that, the draft permit renewal for Permafix Northwest will be having a 45-day comment period on the draft supplemental environmental impact statement that to support the draft permit renewal. So there'll be concurrent comment periods that'll run at the same time from January 27th to March 14th. And then the very last point that's not on the slide that I just wanted to highlight was, of course, our team here at Ecology, our awesome outreach and education team. We do more than public involvement. We love to come and talk to community groups, classrooms, public events, community events. We have a full staff now. We hired one of our vacant positions and added a new position last year. And if you or a group that you're a part of is interested in having an ecology speaker come to your group or organization, feel free to let us know. You can let me know directly, or you can just message our general Hanford email, which I can drop in the chat here as we start answering questions. But I think that's all the public involvement kind of updates I had, and of course happy to answer any questions on that sphere of things. But I wanted to turn it really quickly back to Stephanie to see if there's anything we missed, Stephanie.
Thanks, Ryan. I'll just highlight, if you're wondering, I know this is the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. If you're wondering why the Permafix renewal is here, and we're updating you on that. If you're not familiar with Permafix, they're a commercial treatment facility that have a dangerous waste permit through us, where we authorize them to treat and store dangerous waste. A lot of the waste they receive is from the Hanford site. So there is a nexus there if you're wondering whether you should look at that permit or not. So I just wanted to mention that. And then the other thing I'll just mention, along with, administration changes, Ryan mentioned outreach events and stuff. We have also received an executive order from the governor on Washington state budget and being impacted due to a projected shortfall in state funds through the next 4 years. And what that means is that depending on the type of funding used for travel, hiring, contracts, goods, and services, we may be impacted in our ability to hire, to issue a contract, issue new goods and services, or to do travel. We're really being encouraged to do things virtually as much as possible right now and trying to limit travel, especially any out-of-state travel. Again, it depends on, there are some exemptions to that, but I did want to just throw that out there in addition to the staffing shortage that we're trying to work through. We're also working through some Washington state budget constraints right now. And I know the next slide is questions, and so I'm happy to go to the next slide, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have for us. Jeff, maybe I can turn it over to you to facilitate Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Esteban, you're up.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think, and thanks, Stephanie and Ryan, I know the great work. And so I think that was my big question, I think, with the switching administrations at the national and the state level when it comes to that. I think in emphasizing about the role of, ecology is about, with Hanford Waste and permitting everything and the work you all do. what is it that, you kind of like are focusing on when it comes to the outreach and educating the public on, the current, like Ryan did, commented about the different public comment periods that are coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, I can touch base on that real quick, Stephanie, if that's okay, for part of it. Or okay. So one thing that we do have an emphasis on in the new year, Esteban, is a few years ago, the Washington State passed what's called the Healthy Environment for All Act, which is kind of the state of Washington's environmental justice law, and it outlines that there's, I think, 6 or 7 state agencies that are directly impacted, and other agencies have an option to opt in. One deliverable under the HEAL Act was for the impacted state agencies to develop what's called their community engagement plan. So Ecology has been operating under a provisional community engagement plan for the last several years, and our headquarters over in Olympia Lacey is they're still working to finalize our community engagement plan, but once that's done, we're going to be taking the statewide ecology community engagement plan, and we'll be making kind of a nuclear waste program version of it that's more specific for like Hanford and nuclear waste kind of issues. So it'll obviously be a lot of similarities, and it'll closely align with the ecology wide plan. But that's kind of an emphasis with one of the new positions that was started on my team is they're the lead on developing the nuclear waste program's kind of community engagement plan, and making sure that it aligns with our statewide plan, but also with the Hanford site public involvement plan, which is something that all 3 agencies have. So that's just a quick kind of emphasis that we'll have on kind of our outreach kind of work in the new year. And the other just general emphasis is we're just trying to rebuild our general outreach and education work, because we had some really short staffing for about a year there, and we had to cut back on a lot of that work that we could do. So we've just been trying to rebuild and kind of re-energize our outreach and education. So looking forward to doing more of that in the new year. And Stephanie, sorry if I interrupted you. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, that was great, Ryan. I just, add, Esteban, I heard you ask about, priorities with new administration. I've heard so far, coming down from our new Governor Ferguson down to Director Six-Hiller, who was appointed by the governor, priorities include a bias for action, getting things done in a service-oriented way, and being proactive and engaging with communities that are impacted by the decisions that we make, and figuring out the best ways to do that. So, all of us will be challenged to answer those questions. All of the different programs within ecology will be challenged to answer those questions as we continue to work on, the very important decisions that we have in cleaning up the environment for the state, and how we can build on processes that we already have in place.
We have questions from Max and then Mia.
Thanks, Jeff. Ryan, Stephanie, Eddie, thank you as always. Could you speak a little more to the retrieval of the single shell tanks, and why it takes a long time to get to those actions? Sort of what's driving those processes to take some time?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So if you're familiar with system plan, the document itself is modeling done by the Department of Energy to identify the sequencing for single shell tank retrievals. If you're familiar a little bit about single shell tanks, there's 149 of them on the Hanford site. The retrieval of those tanks typically takes the spans over a couple of years, right, for each individual tank. So with system plan, Department of Energy tries to identify what's the quickest and most efficient way to retrieve those tank systems. Specifically related to B109, T111, and T101, Department of Energy looked at how can we accelerate what is already built into system plan, and identified in there on the timeframes as to when those tanks can be retrieved. Department of Energy concluded in their evaluation that the practicability of going after those tanks sooner would greatly impact the tank waste treatment mission when it comes to direct feed low activity waste coming online. It would drastically impact current retrieval milestones that are in place. So specifically what they still have to do in the east area, and what they're planning on doing in the west area under the holistic agreement. This also includes possible impacts to any treatment activities on the west side of the tank farms as well. So Department of Energy and Ecology both looked at the evaluation that was conducted by Department of Energy and concluded that at this time, based off of the information that we have about tank farm retrievals, that accelerating the retrieval of those 3 tank systems is not practicable because of tank space issues within the double shell tank systems. The fact that waste receiving facilities, which were required to go after B farm and T farm, are not in place right now, and would be a multi-year project to construct that infrastructure to go after those tanks. So there's a number of factors that kind of played into what is the sequencing for the tank farms, the single shell tanks, and what makes the most sense, and what reduces the most risk with the sequencing that's in place under system plan right now, and what's agreed to in milestones.
Thank you, Eddie.
Mia.
Hi, yeah. Stephanie, I'm curious about in the past, Ecology has gone to DC for lobbying purposes for advocating for a compliant Hanford budget. And I know you now have I believe, full-time lobbyist or maybe part-time lobbyist in DC. But in terms of you and your staff going, are you still planning on doing those trips? And is that at all affected by the budget shortfall for Washington State?
I can always count on you, Mia, to ask the really great questions and tough ones. So that is definitely on our radar, especially with the federal administration that was just sworn in yesterday. So it is a priority, but because we have almost entirely new governor's office policy folks that we work with, anytime we go back to DC and have conversations and strategize about how to have the conversation around budget that's needed or things that might get written into bills about Hanford, we work really closely with the local governor's office as well as our governor's office as a presence in DC. So the first step for me is to educate the local policy folks that are new on what Hanford is, determine what level of involvement they want to have, make sure our priorities are still the same before I go back and have those conversations. I'll say that last year, how we modeled it was in the spring. I was new in this role, so a lot of it was me starting to build relationships with the Washington congressional delegation staffers. And we did that virtually, kind of meet and greet. So that's another option, which will help us, especially if we can't get an exemption to travel. If it's still in place, there is a budget freeze still in place. If we can't get an exemption for in-person travel, then setting up meetings virtually to continue the really important conversations around the budget that's needed for Hanford. Anything that we see the administration possibly do that isn't in alignment with the legal agreements that we have, whether that's the consent decree or the tri-party agreement as well, that might be a concern to us. We have built connections with those folks, and so they're also kind of keeping a watch for us when they see things, so we can have one-on-one conversations as well. So it's not like we're just waiting for a meeting to happen. I'm thankful to say that they sort of know the hot topics. They're familiar with the holistic agreement. They're familiar with the tri-party agreement, with the consent decree, and those really being the underlying legal documents that we expect Department of Energy to be requesting budget to and to be doing work under. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. That's very reassuring.
Stephanie, I have a couple questions. The first one should be easy. Do you get any money from DOE in your budget?
The majority of our funding is federal funding. It's fee-based funding for mixed waste fee. There's like a a Washington code that requires DOE essentially reimburse us for money that we do to oversee and implement RCRA permitting. And so we assess a fee to the Department of Energy, and I'd say that's about 80% of the work that we do. And then the other part of our funding is through the tri-party agreement. It says we can request grant funding for oversight and regulatory review of CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act. And that's an annual grant that we apply for with the Department of Energy and that they approve.
Okay, thank you. My second question has to do with regulatory oversight of waste shipments. So with Permafix, for example, that's all inside the state of Washington. And that's where you've got your organization or your agency has purview. So if something gets put on a truck or a rail car and leaves the state, is that where your responsibility ends and someone else has to pick it up?
So Eddie, I'm wondering, so this conversation has come up in a few different forums as we've kind of, really tried to figure out who are the various Washington state agencies that have oversight of shipments. And it depends on whether it's a federal agency.
I asked
and it depends
EPA,
on.
Yeah, I asked EPA the same question a couple months ago and got some hand waving, and they weren't sure about how to answer the question. So I'm hoping you could help clarify it.
I'm going to, so yeah, there are other agencies outside ecology that oversee waste shipments, but I'm going to let Eddie answer this question. And the other thing that I'll say is part of why I'm asking Eddie to attend is because transportation is also, Eddie, if you can speak to the conversations that you have at the Western Interstate Energy Board meeting. And I believe, Max, you also send representation to that. And coupled with that meeting is a transportation stakeholders forum as well. So there might be some insight through that. Eddie, go ahead and respond.
Yeah, so I think what I'll put out there first related to Department of Ecology's oversight of transportation is that we don't oversee the transportation of hazardous materials within the state of Washington or outside of the state of Washington. U.S. Department of Transportation is where the regulations lie for the transportation of hazardous materials, and the oversight of that primarily relies on the U.S. Department of Transportation. Within the state, there are a few agencies that have different pieces of this oversight. So in particular, Washington State Patrol does inspections of commercial vehicles that transport hazardous materials. Specifically with transuranic mixed waste, there are notifications required by the Department of Energy to identify when those shipments are going to occur, and Washington State Patrol conducts those inspections of those commercial vehicles before they move throughout the state of Washington. Other agencies, such as our emergency management agencies, Department of Health, Department of Transportation within Washington State, all have a very narrow role when it comes to emergency response. But that really is the gist of the state's role related to transportation within Washington. Most of that lies with the U.S. Department of Transportation and the requirements for hazardous material shipments.
I'll also just add to that, if the waste is hazardous, it will have a hazardous or dangerous waste manifest. And we do oversee the manifest portion. And then Department of Ecology's spills program, if they're to the point that Eddie made about emergency response, if there's a spill in the state of Washington, then our spills program, they don't operate out of the Richland field office, our office here, but out of the other regions would respond in the event of an emergency to a spill, in the event of a hazardous or dangerous waste spill to the environment.
Yeah, and thanks for that clarification, Stephanie. So regarding the manifest, so Department of Energy is required to put forward a manifest for any shipments of hazardous materials, which includes hazardous waste. Those manifests are tracked from cradle to grave. So depending on their route and the shipments of that hazardous materials, Department of Energy is required to maintain those manifests, and our inspectors do look at them from periodically to determine if there were any issues that occurred along the transportation route of that hazardous materials and whether it made it to its final destination for treatment, storage, or disposal as well. The only other part that within Washington State that Department of Ecology regulates is we do issue permits for transfer stations. So there are a handful of transfer stations that are identified within Washington State, and we do have some oversight of those transfer stations and the waste that stops at those locations as they move across the state.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I guess as a follow-up comment that the state of Washington could make a regulatory decision that essentially shifts risk, whatever that defined risk is, out of the state of Washington to or through another state. And, once it crosses the state boundary, it's someone else's problem, as they say. And that's the way our system works in this country. So thanks for that clarification. Mike.
Yeah, I understood you to say that the state of Washington is responsible within the state of Washington, but then you elaborated on manifests saying that these are tracked from cradle to grave, and that I understood you to say that the state of Washington was informed or alerted or in some way connected through that manifest to all of the incidents that might happen to that shipment until it reaches its destination. Did I misunderstand you?
So the manifests identify where they're going to, right? So once they leave the generator site, in this case, the Hanford site, they are required to go to a permitted treatment, storage, or disposal facility. Those manifests identify the timeframes it took for the waste to leave this site and transit to the treatment, storage, or disposal facility for those activities. When it comes to the oversight of the transportation itself, that falls solely within the U.S. Department of Transportation's regulatory authority, not the state of Washington, not ecology in particular for the transportation of hazardous materials. We do review the manifests that are generated that are required to be kept as a record by the generator to make sure that it was treated appropriately at a permitted facility and that it was disposed of appropriately at a permitted facility.
But I'll
Thank
just
you.
clarify,
If
that's
something-
not like that's not a pre-approval for the waste to ship. It's, the generator will fill out a manifest. They'll have to keep a copy of it and then we'll look at it. So they don't have to get like Washington State Department of Ecology's approval to ship something.
So if a truck goes off the road in Oregon,
It's Mark Reese's problem. Mark, can we hear from you next?
Yeah, I just want to reassure the group because there's a lot of different things going on. And I do sit on the same committees with Eddie and Suzanne Dahl from the Department of Ecology, along with our partners from Washington State Patrol. And there's 11 Western states that are part of a group that is administered through the Western Interstate Energy Board dealing with high-level waste, transuranic waste shipments. Our agency is also charged with monitoring the in-state shipments of material that goes on annually. and that's part of our charge. But there's a separate planning group related to radioactive material shipments that's been ongoing. It's nothing new. It's been going on for decades. And it is also administered through the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, which is a DOE-led function. So we are well in that, and there's a separate groups that meet regularly, and we talk about all the future planning for resumption of true. We're talking right now about holistic negotiations. We're also talking about the future of the stranded spent fuel at facilities, in-state Trojan, high-level waste potentially that's coming off Hanford site down the road related to holistics, all those things. So there is groups. I just want to assure everybody that there's different groups that are dealing with that. Also, there's the other groups that deal with the radiological emergency planning for the fixed facilities. So if that helps.
Yes, thank you. Max, do you want to jump the queue or wait?
I am going to jump the queue, Jeff. Thank you for that prerogative. I would like to just suggest that at our next meeting, transportation planning, safety, permitting seems like an excellent topic for us to arrange a presentation on, and maybe invite the Western Interstate Energy Board representative or perhaps a US DOE transportation group and speak to the board about what they do and how they do it.
And just also, we're working on the biennial transportation report right now for the legislature, and the board will also get a copy of it.
Esteban.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Then today we had a presentation from somebody from Energy Community Alliance, and one of the big things, and I think, and thanks Ryan for mentioning it, and Stephanie, and I know talked to a lot of them like Max and Mark, everybody, the staff, but when it comes to environmental justice and like the big, I think, concern about is federal funding, how would it be possible? I don't know both legislature sessions are happening, but what would be the possibility of collaboration between the two states under the umbrella of environmental justice and frontline communities proposing something that, because I think, isn't that concern about when it comes to, the federal funding for all these EJ federal funding that's kind of falling through the cracks now?
Brian, do you want to talk about sort of link the EJ work that you gave a highlight over and how that might be some nexus in working with Oregon? I know we've on various EJ efforts, it's also been a topic in the past at the Hanford Senior Executive Committee. That's a committee formed under the auspices of the Tri-Party Agreement, and the Director of Ecology, the manager of Hanford, and the regional administrator for Region 10 are part of it. Environmental justice has been a topic on the last couple of meetings that I have attended, including, various states have their own environmental justice programs, and then federal governments also have their own environmental justice programs as well. And we've talked about how Department of Ecology can try and leverage the efforts that are being done by the Environmental Protection Agency at the time, and how DOE can try and leverage the work that's being done by both ecology and EPA under our own programs as well. But Ryan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, how we can coordinate with Oregon on the ongoing work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think there's a couple components there, and one of them, I'll be upfront, I don't have a lot of answers for, and that's the nexus and kind of where the Oregon and Washington legislators could get together and kind of tie in EJ together. That's something I'm not super familiar with on how the governments work together. We probably have to bring in one of our staff from our government affairs office, which I think that's Carrie Sessions now, right, Stephanie? So we might have to talk to her to get that answer about how that kind of connection point would work. But on the more of the state agency side, I think, I could certainly might be really good for me and, Max and Mark and the Oregon folks to get together, and we could see at least on, that side of things on where there's areas we can connect and collaborate on more.
I do see in the chat that Tom Cecilia put that yours is being in Oregon, it's being worked by the Oregon Environmental Justice Council. I will say that Washington does also have an Environmental Justice Council that each of the cabinet agencies has a representative that sits on. Our representative is out of headquarters. It's Millie Piazza, and that's the Office of Equity and Environmental Justice. So we actually have a separate program at our headquarters office that has maybe 2-3 people in it that kind of implements all of the state EJ requirements and then funnels those down into each of the 10 different environmental programs we have in our agency. So we would probably need to take this question back up to the program lead for that to figure out what could be the nexus in working with other like Oregon government's legislature on efforts and lessons learned that are happening, conversations that are happening in the Washington Environmental Justice Council. I'm not privy to a lot of that, but it's a really good question. And as Ryan said, we can take it back and do some follow-up.
Okay, Jim Doherty.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe it's better held over to the transportation discussion that Max wanted to have. But, we had some 2.5 million pounds of radioactive material come into Oregon and be put right here in the Arlington, both in a lined and unlined landfill. And, the DEQ got after folks, but it came in over a period of 3 years. And they were supposed to at least give the counties or the emergency managers a heads up on what was coming in on the rail cars. Maybe not specifically what day things were coming in, but generally speaking what was coming in. And so certainly something went awry in that process. And so I would assume it's got to be a similar sort of process, but it does happen.
Okay, we are nearing the end of the meeting. Are there any other questions or comments to close it out before we thank our friends from Ecology? Well, Edward, Stephanie, Ryan, we appreciate your taking the time out of your day to brief us and educate us. So appreciate it. And we will definitely link you up with the Science on Tap organization. They hold meetings in both Portland and Vancouver, and they're very well attended, typically several hundred people in attendance at these. So, okay, last call.
Thank you, Jeff, and the board. Really appreciate you inviting us to be here with you today.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you all.